What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and we are back with a new episode of Under the Radar, and this is perhaps the biggest episode of Under the Radar I've done to date, because we're talking about count 'em, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 albums that came out on the weekend of May 20th, 2022, and yeah, so this is going to be a hefty episode, so let's not waste any more time. Let's get started. And the first album I'm going to be talking about is an album from a Finnish melodic death metal band called Thy Kingdom Will Burn, and their album The Void and the Vengeance. So yeah, like I said, Finnish melodic death metal band. This is my first time ever hearing about this band. And going through this album, you know, for me, whenever I was listening to the music on this album, there were some really cool leads on this album, some wonderful melodic riffs that definitely harken back to the days of classic melodeath like Carcass, At the Gates, Early in Flames, so on and so forth. So there's some potential on this album. My main gripes with it, at least off the top of my head right now as of recording this, is I wasn't the biggest fan of some of the vocals. Like, they kind of came off as more of a metalcore, hardcore kind of scream. So the vocals were a little bit for me. And then my other complaint would be that while there were some cool riffs and some cool leads, it kind of felt a little bit of like a paint-by-numbers melodic death metal album or a standard melodic death metal album. It didn't really like push any boundaries. Well, there was some acoustic guitars that I thought were quite tasty on this album. It's just, for the most part, it's just basically like, okay, let's just put this album together and see what sticks. And about a good 75% of it stuck, but not all of it worked out for me. Because it's like you hear some of these ideas in other bands, and I think there are other bands within melodic death metal that can do what this band does, but do it better. Not saying it's a bad album by any stretch of the means. It's actually a good album. There were some really cool moments on it. It's just, it did kind of feel like a standard paint-by-numbers melodeath album. And for those reasons, I give this album a 7.5 out of 10. It is solid for sure. If you are a fan of melodic death metal, you might find something you really like on this album. But for someone who's been really into death metal for a long time, or even in melodic death metal such as myself, did kind of wish there could have been more on this album in terms of overall songwriting diversity to kind of break the formula a little bit. But who knows, maybe I'll eat my words later in the year if I listen to it again. Maybe my opinion will change, but it can be the case with some albums, I will say. But there you have it. So now moving on to the really good stuff that came out, and man, we got a lot to go through. First, we're talking about the new album from Italian death metal band Sadist and their album Firescorched. So I've heard this name pop in and out of death metal circles for a while, Sadist, and I saw on their Metal Archives page that they are a progressive death metal band, more in the vein of the early progenitors of that, as well as technical death metal bands like Death and Atheist, Nocturnus, Pestilence, and Cynic. So here I was thinking, I'm going to get a lot of wacky technical stuff. Turns out that wasn't the case. You got little bits of it here and there, but this was more geared towards progressive death metal. And honestly, I was pretty impressed with this album. Like, there was some really cool flourishes of melody on here, some great bass work. Like, the bass tone on this album's quite profound. Even some of the riffs, like, it didn't really feel like a copycat of the pioneers of this style, like Death and Atheist and Nocturnus. It kind of felt like they were just taking some inspiration from those bands, but making it into something of their own. And there was even some like really heavy dissonant moments on here that can harken back to the days of Morbid Angel and bands along those lines that do dissonance and atmosphere quite well. So this was almost like a melting pot of early death metal and early progressive death metal kind of blended together with more melodic moments plastered on top of everything. And vocally, it kind of goes a little bit all over the map in terms of extreme metal. Like, you do get some screamy vocals, but you get some pretty good growly, guttural stuff on here. But the thing I really latched onto was some of the more, some of the songs where it's like they move from one style of death metal to another. And that was the thing I latched onto with this album, and for that, I give this album an 8.5 out of 10. This was some really good stuff, and maybe after listening to it again, it might go up in score, because there was some really cool, promising moments on this album for me, so 8.5 out of 10 is where it sits. Next up, talking about a big one that came out over the weekend that I didn't get to do the full review for. Well, actually, I wasn't planning to do the full review for it on Sunday. I'll get to that album later. But we're going to be talking about Blut aus Nord with their album Disharmonium, Undreamable, a.k.a. So yeah, my first time listening to this French atmospheric industrial black metal band. So yeah, I definitely have heard the name Blut aus Nord come up a lot in recent years. It's just, for me, as someone who's very picky about black metal, I wasn't sure if I was going to get into this. Boy, was I wrong in thinking that I wasn't going to like it. I actually liked a good chunk of this album, because it's not the whole, like, oh, let's just noodle around with tremolo riffs and nothing else. These guys were coming up with some really disturbing shit. Like, you definitely do get some of those classic tremolo riffs from black metal, but you get a lot of doom on this album. You get some more doomy foot stomping stuff, you get some groove going on here, and of course the atmosphere is quite profound. But also what I think adds to the atmosphere is more of those industrial elements and those elements of just absolute discomfort and just claustrophobia all over the place. Like, it just feels like you're trapped in a cave and you can't get out, and you're freaking out and you're just struggling to get your way out of that cave. That's kind of the atmosphere I get from this. It's just all about invoking discomfort and fear to the listener, as far as the way the music was constructed, the atmosphere, the industrial parts that come in, and as well as the foot-stomping, doomy, stuffy it. Vocally, I will say, excuse me, pretty much my biggest complaint about this album, the production was not the greatest, especially vocally, to be honest, because it's like, you don't really get lyrics. It's just because of how this production job was done, it's like the vocals are just screams and growls and nothing else, and they get buried a lot in the mix, because of they're just more about driving the instrumentation into your ears rather than the vocals. I don't know if that's a trope with Blut aus Nord, considering this was my first time listening to them. So, I mean, let me know in the comments if this is a trope with Blut aus Nord, where they have no lyrics and they just growl and scream the whole time. And also, they just got buried in the mix. But aside from that, this was a really good one. 8.5 out of 10 for this as well. So, not a bad first start for me when it comes to Blut aus Nord. I just wish the vocals could have come out more in the mix, and I think it would have made it a better album, at least in my mind. But now we get on to two albums that absolutely blew me away. First, we're going to be talking about the new solo album from Dream Theater frontman James LaBrie, and the album is called Beautiful Shade of Grey. So yeah, James LaBrie, legendary vocalist from Dream Theater. I actually am a big fan of his vocals. I know James LaBrie has always been one of those vocalists where it's like you either love him or you hate him. There's no in between. It's like you either love his vocals or you absolutely fucking hate him. I absolutely love his vocals. He's got a great voice for Dream Theater that fits, and what more can I say about James LaBrie as a vocalist? Now, I had heard about his solo project in the past and how it was like progressive melodic death metal. Well, it's mainly only mellow death because he would have somebody else do the screaming vocals while he would do the cleans. But here, we get something completely different for a James LaBrie solo album. This is not really metal per se. This is more of a straight-up progressive rock album with it's pretty much acoustic guitar-driven, with great drum work, solid bass work, and James' voice just comes soaring through so many of these songs, especially the opening Devil and Drag. And there are two versions of that song. There's the opener, which is the acoustic version, and then the finale track, which has heavier electric guitars. So that's really like the one metal song, or one metal part of the album. Although you do get like clean guitar solos on the electric, but more often than not, this is mostly acoustic driven. And I know this will probably turn some people off because, oh, it's not metal enough, it's just all acoustic. If you are a music lover, instead of just being always about heaviness, and you want to enjoy something more mellow, more relaxing, more fun, and diverse with acoustic guitar work, this is a hell of an album to get into. I really love this album. I actually am thinking of picking this one up relatively soon. I'm giving this a 9.5 out of 10. I love the musicality on here, and the acoustic performance was absolutely beautiful. James's vocal performance was beautiful. The bass work was beautiful, and the drum work was beautiful. The production was great. I can't think of anything really to complain about this album. Granted, was it what I was expecting? Absolutely not. I was expecting a more prog metal, heavier dexterity to it. But even for an acoustic album, for the most part, this is some wonderfully performed music. And nothing more, nothing less to say. Now we get to the final album that came out on May 20th, and that is the album I originally was going to do the review for on Sunday, but I just wasn't feeling doing the recording that day, so I decided, you know what, let's put it on Under the Radar and give it some love. And as, of course, the latest offering from Swedish prog power metal band Evergrey with a Heartless portrait, the Orphean Testament. I've reviewed the last two Evergrey albums and really, really liked them. Granted, their last one that came out early last year, it was really good, but kind of fell in comparison to the one prior in 2019. I will say, though, despite these last three Evergrey albums being really the only full albums I've listened to from this band, I can wholeheartedly say that out of the last three, this is the best one. This new one, A Heartless Portrait. I mean, just everything about it is absolutely incredible. Like, you get some really heavy, chunky riffs. You get some great melodic guitar work, great leads, vocals are just absolutely incredible. And I love how, at certain times on this album, you could kind of see some of the influences of the band kind of shine. Like, there's little hints of Mastodon, little hints of Dream Theater, little hints of even like some of the Swedish melodic death metal bands in terms of some of the more melodic guitar lines. Granted, they are from Gothenburg, the home of melodic death metal in Sweden for the most part, so maybe a little kinship there, but I just love how diverse the songwriting was. They range from like doomy stuff to a little bit more mid-tempo to even a little hints of speed kind of comes into play at certain times. But yeah, I just think in terms of everything in the past 3 years for Evergrey, this is the strongest work that they've done in recent times. I give this one a 9.5 out of 10. This is a killer album for fans of progressive metal, and really the only thing that makes this album power metal really in any way is some of the symphonic parts that come in. But aside from that, this is just a straight up prog metal gem of 2022. Highly recommend. But what did you guys think of any of these albums? If you have heard of any of these albums, let me know your thoughts in the comments. I will have links to all these albums in the... God, why is my voice going away? in the description box. I apologize for the coughing. I don't know why that was happening, but links to these albums will be in the description box for you guys to check out for yourselves. And until next time, horns high. See you in the next one.
Yeah, so music, I think it was just kind of hearing like my parents listen to like just whatever they were listening to around the house, and like flipping through the music channels on TV. I'm not sure if you had what it was like in the US and things, but in the UK we had like a few channels like Kerrang, Scuzz, things like that, which would play your kind of anything kind of mainstream at the time, if you could say. So like you would get Slipknot, System of a Down,
yes,
and loads of like Sum 41, Linkin Park, and all that kind of stuff.